For close to 2 years now, borrowers have had their student loans on pause due to the pandemic. Unfortunately, this period of no accruing interest and no mandatory payments is soon coming to an end. The federal government is expected to resume repayments by February of next year, and it's not just a few million Americans this affects. There are 45 million people with student loans, and together they owe $1.7 trillion. Today, the average borrower has about $36,000 of federal student loan debt, according to a report published last month by the Bipartisan Policy Center. With so much money owed, how do you pay it off?
People are taking longer and longer to pay back their debt because they owe so much on the front end. It's taking them so much longer to pay it back. And so essentially what's happened is student loans have become basically like a 30-year mortgage, where instead of paying it back in 10 years, you're spending 20, 25, 30 years, even longer sometimes, to pay back your student loans. So, what used to be a 10-year obligation is now an obligation that is going to stick around for many people's adult lives and into retirement.
That's Josh Mitchell, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal covering student debt and economics. He's also the author of The Debt Trap: How Student Loans Became a National Catastrophe. In his book, he highlights how President Lyndon Johnson crafted the student loan system in an effort to make college more accessible for everyone. In the years leading up to his presidency, there was pressure building to get more people into STEM fields.
The roots of the student debt crisis are actually embedded in the Cold War. We have to go back to 1957, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first man-made satellite to reach space. And when this happened, this created a panic, and Congress became really concerned that the nation, the United States, was falling behind in the technological race to space. And so members of Congress decided that we needed to rely on colleges to pump out more scientists and engineers so that we can retake the space race and basically beat the Russians.
In 1965, Congress passed the Higher Education Act, which allowed students to take out federal loans for college. By the late 1960s and 70s, the importance of higher education was front and center.
Congress all of a sudden started to focus on things like how to reduce inequality, how to lift people out of poverty. And this was really led by Lyndon Johnson, who had become president, obviously, at this point. And so very quickly, when Lyndon Johnson took office, he broadened the goal of higher education, which was to allow everyone, regardless of their lot in life, regardless of how much money they had or came from, to have an opportunity to go to college so that then they could come out and get a good job.
As loans for higher education became easier to attain, more people started attending college. This money was quickly doled out and often had no upper limit, putting some in precarious positions.
It was in the early 80s that tuition started to skyrocket. It started to rise at triple the rate of inflation. And so then the question becomes, well, why? Why did that happen? And it was right around the early 1980s that the student loan program really started to take off. Now, you might be asking at this point, well, if the program was put in place in 1965, why did it take 15 years for the student loan program to take off? It's a very complicated story, but basically, the answer to that question is two words: Sallie Mae. Congress created this for-profit company in the 1970s called Sallie Mae, which basically was a company designed to guarantee that the more loans banks made to college students, the more money they would earn.
By the early 1980s, this operation was running smoothly and millions enrolled in college. However, the rising demand began to drive up prices at universities. Today, the cost for college has skyrocketed, and Americans are taking out larger loans to compensate. The Bipartisan Policy Center reports that tuition and fees at public four-year universities have risen by 42% between 2006 and 2020. Today, the average total cost for an undergraduate student living on campus, attending a public in-state college for 4 years, is more than $100,000. Even with financial aid, potential scholarships, or grants factored in, how is this number feasible? In some cases, to help out, families step in and shoulder the debt.
Parents are increasingly taking out debt on behalf of their college children to help them pay for their undergraduate tuition. So it used to be the American tradition of, if you're a middle class or an upper class family, you pass wealth down to your children. You leave money for them so that they can inherit their money. But the opposite is happening right now. You actually have debt being passed upward. You have parents, and in some cases, grandparents, taking on debt on behalf of their children just to give them a shot at the American dream.
Another area where debt is quickly growing: advanced degree programs.
More than 40% of student debt outstanding in the United States is graduate school debt. And this is where a lot of the growth is. People are taking out $50,000, $100,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars in student debt to go to grad school, to go to medical school, to go to law school. So this is where the biggest source of growth is right now.
With so much money that needs to be paid back month after month, something unexpected can happen in life, and it can be easy to quickly fall behind on payments and end up in default. Mitchell says that this scenario is all too common, and it's feeding into an unsustainable crisis.
If you look at how many people were defaulting on their loans before the pandemic, it was, on a typical day, it was 1 in 5 people who had student loans in the repayment cycle who were in default on their student loans. That's twice the level of people who were in default on mortgage loans at the height of the housing crisis. And we all agree that that was the housing crisis. So if you look at how many people are falling behind on their loans, it's even more than during the housing crash.
The reality is that as students' loans start back up next year, millions will struggle to stay on top of payments. Mitchell says that many young people are pushing off major milestones like marriage, starting a family, or buying a house because they're burdened by debt. It's clear that the current system is broken, but for those looking to get a degree soon, what are some practical options?
Community colleges also provide a whole range of different types of programs. They provide job training related programs. They provide general education. They provide programs for students who are still in high school to take college level courses. They provide programs for students who are interested in transferring to a 4-year college. And they serve students from a range of different characteristics, right? So students who are enrolling immediately from high school, they also have a number of different opportunities for people who are working full-time and also trying to get a college degree.
That's Dr. Laura Perna, a professor of education and vice provost for faculty in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. Currently, 19 states offer tuition-free community college programs for students who meet eligibility requirements. Enrolling in this kind of program and staying home for 2 years and then transferring to a 4-year university can save thousands of dollars. In addition, Perna says, don't be afraid to ask for guidance from an expert.
There's variation across high schools and the extent to which there are counselors and other staff that can help students understand and find out what the costs of going to college are. I've done a project with my research team looking at net price calculators. And so net price calculators are one potential mechanism that can help students and their families try to understand, what are the costs and how much financial aid might they be eligible for. So there could be assistance in the form of grants. And so important to recognize what a grant is. And so a grant is money that doesn't have to be repaid. And so, looking to see and try to get a sense of the availability of grants. Also asking questions about, how is eligibility for grants determined? Is it based on your financial need? Do you have to meet some academic requirements? What do you have to do to get a grant? And then what do you have to do to keep it after you enroll?
Sifting through the many options of where to attend and how to pay for higher education can be overwhelming, but doing the work now, asking questions and understanding how much you owe is critical to avoiding long-term debt after graduation. To find out more about this topic and our guests, Josh Mitchell and Dr. Laura Perna, visit viewpointsradio.org. Also check out Mitchell's new book, The Debt Trap, available online and in bookstores now. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
My first symptom was that I smelled like burning smoke, like the house was on fire for, I think, a whole week straight, nonstop, 24/7.
Understanding the fifth sense, smell. Then,
in some cases, some of these kids, unfortunately, are living pretty difficult lives. So we see it as a very simple thing, as a way to just kind of take care of them through food.
Meet one chef who's trying to change up the school lunch landscape. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.